Again, we see images of blue lotuses. Is there another, less obvious interpretation of this symbol?
Altering of consciousness has been done by a variety of different methods and techniques, most commonly in shamanistic cultures. Still to this day, it's done by using hallucinogenic plants, which, as it were, switch the receiver wavelength of the brain and allow us to tune in to other realities. Of course, there are a range of non-drug techniques, rhythmic dancing, certain kinds of music, certain kinds of spaces have an effect on human consciousness. But there's a great deal of evidence that they made use of a potion involving the blue lotus and the mandrake root, possibly also the opium poppy as well, to enter a visionary state, and in that visionary state to explore, navigate, and learn about the realm that lies beyond death. And they had very concrete and specific ideas about this, which are expressed in the ancient Egyptian books of the dead, going right back to the pyramid texts. This was not a work of imagination on the part of the priests. This was a work of documentation of their out-of-body exploration of realms that lie beyond the merely physical.
Is it possible for us to learn to access other realms today? Can we expand our capacity to perceive? Do we need new ways to describe these phenomena?
If I come to that and say, I saw you in my dream, you're going to ask me, what did you see? Then I say the dream. Now, did I show you? The verb see is not there, because I did see you in my dream, but not with my eyes, because I was asleep. So how did that happen? It must be a sense put all this vision to me without my eyes. But I still, when I speak, limit vocabularies to say, I saw you in my dream. No, I didn't see you. But there's no other way to say it.
Could the ancients have mastered innate human abilities that we have forgotten?
You can't tell if that bird on the tree is happy or frightened from a cat. Yeah? You can't tell that the donkey is annoyed or happy by the vibration, the sound. And that's what we want us to notice, the sound. It's not the word you said, it's how being said. You can tell if this vibration, the truth or not truth. It's natural. Healthy people, they use all the senses, the full capacity of senses.
The five senses, as we know them today, were symbolized by the scarab. And
when you see the scarab, you are looking at a human skull, divided in three sides, three sections. The front head, symbolized by ancient people as seven openers, 2, 4, 6, 7. That is the front head, and these are the receivers. You see with, you hear with, you taste with, everything. On the left side is the consciousness side, and that is the daily deeds digested every moment you look at things. But the other side is the subconscious side, something you are unable to explain what's going on.
It seems clear that the ancients knew about the subconscious mind. They had the power to reach beyond the senses, something we began to be aware of with the writings of Freud and the advent of psychology in the early 1900s.
Don't compare people of today like the people of the ancient days. The people of ancient days were healthy. They able to use the senses. We looking at things as a crippled people. We only have 5 senses. We're supposed to have 360 senses. 360, and only 5 is recognized. We got the glands of the sense, but we didn't use it. And any muscles you don't use, it shrink, obviously.
How can we begin to imagine that the ancients had the capacity of 360 senses? Perhaps a metaphor for the full spectrum senses could be a sphere. Is it possible for us to move beyond our 5 senses today?
Our 5 familiar senses have been evolved by evolution to connect us to the physical and material realm. But we have, I like to think of it as a secret doorway inside our own minds, which can be opened in altered states of consciousness, through which we may project our consciousness into other realms and dimensions, and those then become accessible to us.
Could it be that the ancient Egyptians were accessing supernatural realms through heightened perceptions that came from full spectrum senses?
I've come to the conclusion that it's really impossible to understand ancient Egyptian civilization and ancient Egyptian spirituality and religion until you get to grips with the fact that the priests of that religion were deliberately and in a targeted way cultivating altered states of consciousness in order to access the supernatural realm. They know what shamans all over the world still know today, that in the alert, problem-solving state of consciousness that is particularly valued by Western industrial society, you are not going to have supernatural or spiritual experiences of any kind. It doesn't mean that the supernatural and spirit realms are not there, because they are. They are all around us all the time. But our senses cannot tune into them.
It seems that the ancients must have been tuned into something that allowed them to build sacred structures using monumental architecture. Today, we consider ourselves to be highly educated. Yet, engineers are at a loss when they try to build even a small pyramid. Has our system of education diverted us from what was common knowledge in ancient times?
There were no schools and universities like what we have today. We've been influenced by this system of teaching. Today we think it's a relative life, that no education, they haven't been to school, and how can they build a pyramid? They don't know figures, how can they do this? But we don't know that the senses we have make the impossible possible. The impossible to us, which based on ignorance, make it possible. Because knowing is a very great power, just to know.
The most important ceremony for teaching the populace how to live well was the weighing of the heart. It reveals what the ancients believed happened in the moments after death.
Initially, in the ceremony of the weighing of the hearts, the deceased would meet Anubis, who would say, "You're dead. Let's have your heart. We're going to weigh it against the feather of truth." If your heart was heavy, because you had done something immoral, you weren't allowed to go to the other side. So the populace learned that they had to be light of heart in order to live well.
As ancient Egypt slipped into patriarchal ways of being and thinking, the old spiritual ideology became codified, and organized religion became dominated by the Amun priesthood.
The Amun priesthood had a lot of power, and they were in a position to have people pay for their salvation. It used to be that your heart was weighed against a feather of truth, but in later pictures of the ceremony of the weighing of the heart, you'll see Horus holding onto the scale, and you could pay the priesthood for Shakti dolls, and the more of them you had, the more likelihood you could buy the lightness of heart instead of being light of heart if you weren't selling salvation.
We may never know how the high courts of ancient Egypt were run. It seems likely that the stories passed down through the patriarchal institutions of the 19th and 20th centuries may have misled us. The peace and prosperity of the 18th dynasty, particularly in the time of Hatshepsut, Nefertiti, and Akhenaten, had to do with honoring the feminine in balance with the masculine. Looking at Egyptian artifacts and frescoes, it is clear that the feminine principle played a prominent role in society and was cherished and revered. The feminine principle was articulated in the concept of a great mother who was central to the ancient Egyptian worldview and was echoed by other world cultures.
The Milky Way in the sky is mythologized in various ways, in various traditions, in various cultures around the world. And it's often thought of, almost universally thought of, as a great mother principle, the great cosmic mother in the sky.
In ancient Egypt, biology met cosmology, and both were considered sacred.
When you look at the cosmology in terms of biology, is describing events that happen inside of a womb. And the womb happens to be the womb of the mother goddess.
In both Mayan and ancient Egyptian cosmology, the center of the Milky Way galaxy is where stars are born. Metaphorically, it is the womb of the great cosmic mother, represented as Isis, giving birth.
We keep looking at how the ancient Egyptians thought, and everything fed biology and procreation. How we got here, how we came into existence, biology, and then how we left, and how our soul continues to live. And we can see that there aren't really that many symbols that aren't pertaining to balance of the body, mind, and emotions, and to balance between the two hemispheres of the brain. Once we can embrace that, then it's easier to understand the Egyptians.
That switch from matriarchy to patriarchy, I think it's the cause of what's on the world now of conflicts and disagreement and showing off power. Yeah.
Already, the beginning of the first dynasty of ancient Egypt, Egypt was moving from being matriarchal to coming into more patriarchal ways of being and thinking. There were a few periods where the ancient knowledge was remembered, but it's important to remember that there was a lot of ancient Egypt prior to the dynasties and in the early periods that did not represent those values. So the parts of Egypt that I find the most interesting come from the memory of times that came further back.
We are accustomed to our own technology and find it difficult to recognize that the ancients may have had sophisticated technology of their own. Since the technology of the ancients is not obvious to us, are we looking in the wrong place? Could it be they had power systems, but they were entirely different from ours today? Looking at the architecture of structures from ancient Egypt stimulates a sense of wonder. Clearly, Egyptian monuments rival the grandeur of our most modern buildings today. Yet we are taught to believe that we are the ones with knowledge of high technology, something the ancients could not possibly have had.
As long as we think that the ancients weren't able to use high technology, then we're not looking for it. And yet, the evidence is right in front of our eyes.
We find megalithic sites everywhere around the world. So there's certain things in common that they all seem to know, and we don't know it.
Yeah, a lot of people are trying to figure out why mankind built these structures out of these huge megalithic stones. We don't even know how to move 200, 300-ton stones very well today, let alone 4,000 or 5,000 years ago.
I started looking at megalithic structures from an electromagnetic point of view, and sure enough, I began to find that there were these energies there present in measurable forces.
Strange things happen sometimes in sacred sites, and those are clues that the physics that we're taught in school is not everything.
For thousands of years, the pyramids and the Sphinx stood as sentinels on the open desert. Yet, in recent years, a 20-mile wall, 14 feet high, was installed around the enormous site of the Giza Plateau. There are about 100 armed guards patrolling the pyramids at night. Applications for investigative academic research, while entertained initially, are almost all routinely refused. Unlike in times past, tourists are now being restricted from taking photographs in the Egyptian Museum. The monuments of Egypt are World Heritage Sites. Why is access and legitimate scientific research being systematically restricted? Much of ancient Egypt remains undiscovered. Satellite images show traces of buried structures that are still not excavated. In the name of protecting sites, are Egyptian authorities preventing us from learning the truth about our ancient past? Despite strict regulations on what kind of research is allowed, there is still an extraordinary amount of evidence that shows that the ancient Egyptians had knowledge that has been lost.
We don't have the technology to build the pyramids now. Not even close. We're not the most evolved we've ever been. And that is one of the blinders that has stopped us from imagining that the ancients could have been far smarter than us.
Hakim Awiyan was raised by indigenous elders who lived in the area of the Band of Peace. Having preserved the ancient Suf language, stories were passed down generation after generation. Fragments of knowledge from the ancient past were thus preserved.
If my colleague, the scholar, who learned to say that the Egyptians have a piece of rope, put it around the block of stone, at least 60-ton weight, and pulled and pushed by animals and run on wooden blocks. This is what the scholars are saying.
We may never be exactly sure how the pyramids were built. Yet we can begin to reconstruct our understanding of the culture living in the Golden Age and their values. Traditional Egyptology insists that the pyramids were built by slaves to feed the egos of kings. Does this fit with our emerging construct of Egypt in a golden age?
There is no slavery. All workers are willingly pyramids builder. This is a qualified people of architecture, engineers, and they deal with all the power, like cutting stones, transfer it and use it. And that is clear, and not only in the pyramids and in the temple walls and many places you can see that clearly. I said many times that healthy people, they got the power which is unhealthy people haven't got it. And I want you and all my friends and all my beloved to know that you have it. And when you know that, you will work on it to bring it stronger. As I said before, The senses, just like muscles, if you don't use, it shrink and go.